Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating ruling out of the ITAT in Kolkata. And honestly, it's a breath of fresh air because it proves that yes, common sense really can triumph over bureaucratic rigidity. We're looking at a case that perfectly captures that massive tension between the messy reality of actually running a business and the cold, hard technicalities of tax reporting. So picture this. You're filing your paperwork, right? You make a tiny administrative mistake, just an honest typo on a form. But suddenly, because of that one slip, you're staring down this massive, terrifying tax bill. If you've ever felt that pit in your stomach right before hitting submit on a tax portal, you know exactly how scary this scenario is. Well, that automated dread became very real for the taxpayer in our explainer today, and how it ultimately got resolved legally is something every professional needs to hear, because it sets a really powerful precedent for fairness.
Okay, let's get into it with our first core concept, substance over form.
This principle right here, it is the absolute bedrock of today's ruling. Substance over form basically means that tax authorities have to look at the documented reality of what happened with your money, rather than just mechanically punishing a harmless paperwork error. It forces the system to ask, okay, what actually happened here, economically, instead of just going, well, what did the tired accountant accidentally type into the box? And this perfectly frames the core conflict of our story. You see, the initial tax authorities were totally obsessed with the form, the literal mistaken text on the audit report. To them, the typo was the gospel truth. But the appellate tribunal, the ITAT, they focused on the substance. They actually looked at the real-world evidence. It's literally the difference between blindly trusting a computer algorithm's checklist and, a human actually applying their mind to the facts. Let's look at exactly how this played out. We'll call this part the 9.41 lock typo. The whole nightmare started with a completely innocent slip-up in a tax audit report. An amount of 9.41 lakh rupees got accidentally classified as a contingent liability. Now, if you know tax rules, you know that specific label is a massive red flag. Contingent liabilities aren't usually deductible, so popping a number into that specific box instantly triggered a rigid, automated response. The system saw the label, and boom, it pounced. The escalation here is just wild to trace. First, the typo happens. Second, the assessing officer completely ignores the taxpayer, who is practically begging them to realize it's just a clerical mistake and not some secret, undisclosed income. The AO just hits them with a Section 143(1) addition for the whole 9.41 lakhs. Then, it gets kicked up to the CITA, who basically just rubber stamps the AO's decision without even double-checking the underlying documents. It takes going all the way up to the ITAT for someone to finally step in, review the evidence, and strike the whole thing down. The ITAT did not hold back. They took a super definitive, pragmatic stance. They actively called out the lower authorities for failing to apply their minds, saying that refusing to verify the taxpayer's explanation was a fundamental violation of natural justice. They basically said, look, you cannot magically conjure up taxable income out of thin air just because of a typo, not unless you actually have material evidence to back it up. So the tribunal deleted the entire edition, which is great, but the real game changer is how they clarified Section 143(1). They explicitly laid out that this section is only meant for obvious, non-debatable math errors. It absolutely cannot be weaponized to penalize taxpayers over complex, highly debatable reporting issues. If a discrepancy needs human interpretation, you can't just auto-adjust it and slap the taxpayer with a bill. You have to actually do a proper review. Which brings us to the second major issue the tribunal tackled: pandemic relief for PF. Yeah, they didn't stop at the typo. During this exact same assessment, the assessing officer had also mechanically penalized the business for delayed employee provident fund contributions. The AO basically just looked at the calendar, saw the payments were technically late under standard pre-pandemic rules, and issued a penalty. What did they completely ignore? Oh, just the unprecedented nationwide COVID-19 lockdowns. We're talking frozen bank accounts, strict curfews, people literally unable to get to their physical offices to process these payments. It's that same glaring contrast again. The AO robotically punishes the delay. But the IATA, they took judicial notice of reality. The EPFO had actually issued explicit relief measures extending those due dates specifically because of the pandemic. So the tribunal firmly ruled that any contributions made within that official grace period were perfectly valid. I mean, think about it. How can you be penalized for utilizing an extended deadline that the government itself legally granted? It's absurd. So what does this all mean for us? Let's talk implications for taxpayers. Here's the so what you really need to take away from this explainer. First, this ruling is a massive shield.
It protects you from arbitrary, typo-driven additions, provided, and this is absolutely crucial, provided you have the ironclad documentation to back up your reality. Second, it reinforces that taxation should be fundamentally fair, not rigidly blind. Third, it puts a hard leash on Section 143(1), stopping automated adjustments from running wild. And finally, it forces authorities to actually honor genuine government crisis relief. It is a huge win for common sense.
So, as we wrap up today, it leaves us with a really big question to ponder. Does this ITAT decision signal a permanent shift toward taxing actual economic reality, or is this battle between robotic bureaucracy and human common sense just getting started? Well, one thing's for sure, keeping your documentation pristine is still your absolute best armor out there. Thanks so much for diving into the details with me today on The Explainer.